Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. Today's topic is the Kin-Strife. Not to be confused with the kin-slaying. That's elves killing elves back in the First Age. This is a Gondor civil war in the Third Age. When we talk about the reasons why Gondor is kind of ripe to be plucked by Sauron when the time of the War of the Ring comes, people usually refer to three events in the Third Age that weakened Gondor to the point that, it was vulnerable. One of those events is the war with the Wainriders. That ends in 1944 of the Third Age, so roughly 1,000 years before the War of the Ring. That ends with the Battle of the Camp, in which Gondor holds off the Wainriders, but not without heavy losses. The king dies, his heirs die. It's a bad deal. So that definitely sets Gondor back. Jump back a few hundred years, you've got the Great Plague. Obviously, a plague is, that's not good. Anything with the great and plague, those two words together, probably mean bad times are afoot, and they are for Gondor. That's in the 1600s. But the event I'm talking about happens about 200 years before that. This is the Kin-Strife. So, Gondor's civil war happens. As I say, it's followed by the Great Plague, followed a few hundred years later by this war with the Wainriders. Those three events kind of set Gondor on a bad path. What is the Kin-Strife? Kin-Strife, really cool story. It's essentially Tolkien's version of the War of the Roses. It could make a great movie, frankly. So there's a lot of intrigue, a lot of passion, and a whole lot of violence. So here we go. We have to set the table a little bit first. In 1248, there's a king regent on the throne of Gondor. He later becomes the actual king, the 19th king of Gondor. His name is Eldacar. But acting as regent for his uncle and then his father, he engages in a war with the Easterlings and is successful. As such, he renames himself Romendasil II. Romendasil is translated as East Victor. So he's naming himself in honor of this great victory he had over the Easterlings. Somewhere during his reign, he also is the one who's responsible for the Argonath. So those two giant statues of Isildur and Anarion that guard the Anduin, kind of the northern border of Gondor. He's the one who had those built. So he's having his reign, all is well. He's had a military victory. So to honor his alliances, specifically with Rhovanion, he sends his son as an ambassador. So the prince, Eldacar, goes to stay with the self-proclaimed king of Rhovanion. I don't think he actually could be a king, but he calls himself the king of Rhovanion, so what the heck. His name was Vidugavia. And Vidugavia, takes in Eldacar, good friends with our friend Romendasil II. Eldacar, during this time as ambassador, to try to learn the ways of Rhovanion made up of Northmen, essentially, so not Númenóreans. And if you think about it, Rhovanion is the land is just south of what would be of Mirkwood, right? Greenwood / Mirkwood. So in that area is where we're talking about. Eldacar falls in love with Vidugavia's daughter. The daughter's name is Vidumavi. The two of them have a son, Vinit-Harya. Later becomes Gondor's 21st king, Eldacar. Eldacar's a little easier to say than Vinit-Harya, so we'll call him Eldacar. 10 years later, Romendasil kind of calls his son back to court, essentially, back to Gondor. Our friend Eldacar comes back, he brings his wife and his kid with him. This is where the seeds of the Kin-Strife get sown. Because Gondor's got essentially some racists. Okay, so they've got some, hey, look, let's keep the Númenórean blood we've got in our nobles pure. And so they are very distraught at the fact that Eldacar has married, this person from Rhovanion, not a Númenórean, and polluting the Númenórean blood, essentially. Since he is just a prince, and then, later Eldacar becomes king, but he is technically, a Númenórean through and through. It's a grumbling, but it's not a out and out, revolution or anything. But flash forward, Eldacar ends up dying at the age of 238. Everything's okay, although there must be some fracturing going on here in Gondorian society. But it comes to a head when Eldacar dies. So we had Remendesol II. His son Eldacar becomes king. Dies at age 238. Now his son Eldacar, who some Númenóreans consider to be a half-breed, takes over. Boom, civil war. Basically, the opposition side is led by Castamir. Castamir is a noble. He actually had the position of the captain of ships in Gondor. And basically, he was the head of the Gondorian navy. That's going to be important because basically the coastal towns, the southern coastal towns, particularly like Pelargir and Umbar, support Castamir. There is an attack on Osgiliath. Osgiliath at that point is the capital of Gondor. That's where Eldacar, resides, and Castamir wins the day. Destroys a lot of Osgiliath, actually, and Eldacar is forced to flee. He does so. Where would he go? Rhovanion, of course. That's where his friends are. So he flees to Rhovanion, abandons Osgiliath. Now, here's what Castamir shows his cruelty in this moment. One of the worst things he does is he executes Eldacar's oldest son, Ornendil. So that was the prince, in line to become king of Gondor, has just been executed by Castamir. Another thing that Castamir does that has ramifications, ripples, is he destroys the Dome of Stars. Now, the Dome of Stars, it's also what Osgiliath is named, the Fortress of Stars. So there's a theme here that's carried out, and the central major architectural feature of Osgiliath in this day was this Dome of Stars. It was on a bridge that went across the Anduin River, and in that Dome of Stars, again, inside was carved with stars. It was apparently a really marvel to behold. Inside that, it housed one of the Seeing Stones. So one of the Palantir. In fact, the biggest Palantir of the seven. It was a master Seeing Stone. It apparently had even more powers than a typical Palantir. You could, listen in on conversations between other Seeing Stones with this thing. It was bigger than a single person could carry. It was this giant stone house in this beautiful building. It was destroyed, and that Seeing Stone fell into the Anduin, to the depths of the Anduin, never to be seen again. I think I might have mounted a little rescue mission to that thing, but no one ever bothered to for the next 1,500 years. Or maybe they did, and we just don't hear about it, because it was not retrieved ever again. So Castamir is responsible for the destruction. I'll say destruction. I think the Palantir still exists. He took it off the map, essentially, and the destruction of the Dome of Stars, and much of Osgiliath in the process. Just to finish that thought on Osgiliath, it took a beating here in the Civil War, and then I talked about the Great Plague. When the Great Plague comes along a couple hundred years later, Osgiliath has never quite recovered from the Civil War, and the Great Plague pretty much does it in at that point, and so it's just more or less abandoned. By the time we see it in the War of the Ring, we see that in the movies. There were Faramir's trying to hold Osgiliath. I mean, he's just guarding the husk of a city, essentially. And that has its roots here at the Kin-Strife. So, Castamir now rules, Castamir the usurper, rules in Eldacar's stead. Eldacar is still technically the rightful king, but for 10 years he's in exile while Castamir rules. Now, Castamir does a few things here that don't make him popular. One of the things he wants to do is he wants to move the king's seat to Pelargir. Basically move it south into the coast where his people are. And he lavishes a lot of attention on these coastal cities. He likes them, they like him. And he's, obviously since he's a captain of ships and he's good with the Navy, I'm sure, boats and sea life is stuff that he's really into. So he ignores the interior provinces of Gondor, kind of to his own peril, essentially, while he's lavishing attention on these coastal towns. All right, 10 years go by. Now you've got some disenchanted Gondorians from the interior provinces. You've also, of course, got Rovanian still in Eldacar's camp. Eldacar mounts an army to come back and try to reclaim the throne. There's a massive battle that takes place near Pelargir. So he has to kind of take the troops down south and root out Castamir, where he's moved his base of operations. There's a battle called the Battle of the Crossings of Eroe. And in this battle, a massive win for Eldacar. Eldacar actually finds Castamir on the battlefield and slays him, kills him in basically one-on-one combat during the battle. However, Castamir's sons realize the gig is up. They're like, let's get out of here. And they flee back to Pelargir, which is it's a city. It's fortified. So there's a siege that's laid to try to root out Castamir's sons. They hold off the siege long enough that they can escape, and they sail south to Umbar. Eldacar has no ships. That's his big weakness, a huge weakness, actually. The Navy was all on board, so to speak, all in favor of Castamir and his kin. And so Eldacar, not having any boats, can't really give chase, and Castamir's sons successfully escape down to Umbar. Now, Umbar, until this moment, was a province of Gondor. However, in this moment, they have put in their lot with Castamir and his sons. Castamir's dead now, but his sons aren't. And from here on out, through the end of the War of the Ring, they are an independent region. And in fact, just attract all of the enemies of Gondor to their shores. Those corsairs of Umbar. That's where constant problems for Gondor emanate from the Umbar region from here on out. And this is why. It's this moment when Castamir's kin retreat there and they say, okay, yep, we're on board with the Castamir side. Eldacar actually lives to the age of 235, so he had a very long lifespan, even by Númenórean standards. He is then succeeded by his younger son. Of course, remember the older son was killed off, executed by Castamir. His younger son, Aldamir, becomes king. Then eventually, Aldamir is actually killed himself in battle with a force comprised, at least partially, of folks from Umbar. So that Umbar enmity lasts for quite some time, as we see. So this Kin-Strife had a huge impact on Gondor, especially when it comes, 1,500 years later or so to the War of the Ring. You've got, first, the loss of the Seeing Stone, I mentioned that. Osgiliath, which had once been this amazing city, was ravaged. And then once that Great Plague hit a few hundred years later, it just took it off the map entirely. You had, brother versus brother here. This Kin-Strife is Gondorians fighting each other. And a lot of that Númenórean blood that they were so valuing so highly got spilt on these battlefields. And so this was a huge setback for Gondor. And this is an example of, Tolkien's brilliance. A lot of this stuff is in the appendices of the Lord of the Rings, and it just shows, he'd crafted this history in such a way to show that, yeah, Gondor's on its way down. It has these events through time that signal that it's lost something, it's lost its greatness, and it's only after the War of the Ring, when the rightful king returns, that its prominence is restored, and it's Aragorn's return that kind of removes the stain that the Kin-Strife in particular puts on this region. So there you go, the Kin-Strife, everybody. If you have a topic you'd like me to talk about, put it in the comments. Be happy to discuss a topic of your choosing. So anyway, thanks everybody. Have a good one.